Okay, friends, I'm bringing you somebody on the show that I just can't get enough of, and it's Debra Maldonado. She left the corporate world in 2003 to pursue her passion to empower other people to really live out their dreams. She's a certified master Jungian life coach instructor. Those of you who have seen Carl Jung, it's spelled Jung. Maybe you pronounce him Carl Jung. It's Carl Jung, and she is a master at his body of work. And she's the author of Like a Spark from Fire, and the best-selling book Let Love In. She's been featured everywhere, ABC, Fox, Cosmopolitan, HuffPo, you name it. And she's the CEO of Creative Mind, which she created with her husband. And they together have the Creative Mind process, which is really a unique coaching method based on Jungian psychology, Eastern spirituality, social neuroscience. And you've probably heard the term shadow work before. I really see Deborah as the right person to ask about that. So I'm really excited to help all of you listening, wherever you are, with some really deep questions to help you get back online with yourself if you're a little offline, to help you take more responsibility for who you're being in the world and just really be the best version of you that you can be. So thank you so much, Deborah, for being here with me.
I'm so excited. I mean, I'm usually nervous before interviews. You always get those little nerves.
Yeah.
And I told Rob today, I said, I don't feel nervous at all. I just feel so comfortable with you. You
Me
just have
too.
that presence. I think we have this soul
Thank you.
connection. I think we're soul
Yeah.
sisters in some way because I feel completely very at ease and comfortable and happy and excited to be here.
That means so much to me. And I always think like, what is that about? Because if we just let life be that, where it's like if it feels good and light, move towards it. If it feels hard and scary, move away from it. But granted, sometimes we have to do hard and scary things. And I myself sometimes have to discern of like, does this feel sticky and hard and bad because I'm not supposed to be in it? Or is it just me facing a challenge?
That's
Um,
a great question. It's sometimes it could be both. And the more you know yourself, the easier you know that where it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that Carl Jung, perhaps a lot of people listening have heard of Carl Jung, but maybe they're not totally looped in on the body of work that comes with that. And I don't know, like when you say that you're a Jungian expert or that you're a practitioner, what does that really mean, you think, that for people to understand you have your arms around, like that you really get a good sense of that maybe is different from traditional coaching that they hear about?
This is a great question. Well, everyone's heard of Freud,
Yeah.
and some people have heard of Jung, and it's kind of like in the periphery. Maybe they took a intro to psych class and they thought, oh yeah, they brought him up, but they don't really talk about him. And it's because he's kind of like controversial in a way. His body of work it's almost like going into two different directions in psychology, almost. We use a lot of the regular psychology that Freudian brought in. Freud, he believed that there's this unconscious mind or subconscious mind that propels us to take actions without our conscious awareness. And we all kind of know that, our patterns. But he thought that's where it ended. He thought, you know what? That's all there is to us is just a bunch of reactions and conditioning from childhood. And the best we can do is cope with it. He wasn't very like hopeful. But Jung actually started exploring the unconscious, and he had an actual like a dark night of the soul, which he calls it, where he kind of like went through this dark time where he was questioning things and he was exploring the unconscious, and he really discovered that there's another level to us than just our personal unconscious. He said there's a collective unconscious, and most of us who are spiritual know that there's some kind of connection with all of us. There's something greater than our individual self, and that's what he saw. And for the psychology movement, psychology in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people wanted to keep it, like Freud really wanted to keep it scientific and to be acceptable and academic. And Jung was talking about synchronicity and intuition. And he was exploring like the occults back then because he wanted to understand like what's going on in the psyche and why do these people have these dreams and experiences. And so he kind of took it to another way. And so when you see a Freudian and a Jungian, it's like these two sees that part. Now, a lot of Jungians use some of the cognitive behavioral, like as a therapist. We use all this great stuff psychology has come up with,
Mm.
and the Western world, and especially in the U.S., behaviorism has taken over. So you heard like just change your behavior, change your life, think positive. Well, Jung is like, it's not just what you're conscious of. There's this whole ocean of consciousness that we're sitting on
Mm,
generations. And they actually just found out, and you'll find this interesting, Rob just told me about this, that science has discovered biologically we have information and memories from the earliest man. So we basically have a $2 million mind, $2 million, 2 million year mind that we're sitting on. We should all have a $2 million mind too, but the 2 million year mind. So we're not only impacted by our personal experience, but also the collective of humanity, and how we are just gets passed down from generation to generation. So we're exploring something so much deeper, and it may feel overwhelming for someone, but if you see that you're part of something bigger, that not only those patterns, but also the universal intelligence that we have. And some people call it God, some people call it divine, some people call it the universe, that we have access to that within us. And that's what Jung said, that we can actually explore ourselves from an empowered place
mm,
versus a pathological place.
mm,
And so that's the difference. And I'm not a therapist.
mm,
I didn't study Jungian analysis. I'm a Jungian coach, which is very different. It's not a therapy model. We don't diagnose or treat. We're working with high functioning people that want to take their life to the next level, not kind of like work on the past, but more understand the past, but really more focused on moving forward and becoming who they are. And he called that process individuation, which is the
mm,
first part of life. You learn all these patterns about yourself and you're surviving. The second part of life is you really find out who you are, and
mm,
then you make those changes, which I think your show is so perfect
mm,
for the U-turn, because there is a point in our life where we kind of go to that way too. We say all these things aren't working anymore and I need to do something else, but it's not just about thinking positive or powering through or changing behavior. I need to like really find out who I am. And
mm.
that's what Jung does in a nutshell.
I love that. And I love that you're able to distinguish between therapy and coaching. And I also know that people get confused by it. Like,
Mhm.
you talk about you guys don't diagnose, but in your perception, like what would be optimal for someone to choose based on where they're at? Like, how do they choose a
This
therapist for Jungian work versus a coach?
And there's nothing wrong with therapy. We need a lot of therapy,
Yeah.
but it's just the context.
Yeah.
And you can actually do the same type of work, sometimes like exploratory work, but it's the context that you're in. So in therapy, think about a line of like, it's a medical model, right? So there's a line of like typical, like I don't hate to say normal because no one's really normal, but typical high functioning behavior. There's like a human behavior line, and people that need therapy, you typically fall below that line. And the goal of therapy is to get them into normal functioning. So if you have clinical depression or you have traumas that you haven't dealt with, you have PTSD, you have like extreme anxiety or something where you can't like function and you need treatment, that's perfect and ideal for therapy. If you are functioning and you just kind of want to learn about yourself, you want to grow, coaching is probably more appropriate because you're starting from here and going to your potential. So therapy is about getting to the baseline, and coaching is about you're at the baseline already, but you're going to your potential. So, and you can go from therapy to the baseline to your potential too. It doesn't stop. It's not, it's just where you are in the process.
That makes sense. And I know a lot of people have heard the term shadow work before, but
Mhm.
I feel like it's so rare. And one thing that you're so gifted at is being able to like really make sense of it for people. So if and I when I think about Carl Jung, I think about shadow work. Like that to me
Mhm.
feels like
Yeah.
the thing. So why does shadow work matter? What is it? And how can
Mhm.
people start to think about it now? I know that's a lot of questions, but just to kind of get
I
started on.
can I can handle it. Uh,
Yeah.
so so there's a process of individuation, like I said. So think about when you were born, you first of all were born with all your genetic predispositions, and then you were shaped by the world. So your family, how they thought about money, how they thought about relationships, how intimate they were with you, how happy or sad they were, what they thought about connection and nurturing and all those things. And then you go to school, and then you have another layer of people telling you who to be. And so you create this kind of identity of the two things, the ego that you have, it tries to do for you is the first thing is to physically survive. So when you put your hand on a hot stove, pull away, those easy things. You hold your breath, it forces you to breathe. That's baseline again, just survival. But on top of that is social survival. So you make decisions early in life saying, if I speak up here, I'm going to get hit or I'm going to be punished. So I'm going to just be quiet. Or if I'm too quiet and I'm not loud enough, I won't get any attention. So I have to start trouble and go to school and do that. So we have all these like unique experiences, and then we decide who we are, and we kind of be molded by the world and our environment that is adaptable to us. And when I say adaptable, it doesn't mean optimal. Most of it is just trying to survive, right? Socially. So we create this what Jung called a persona. And so we think, you could look at, I don't know if you remember The Breakfast Club, the movie, that
Yeah.
Breakfast Club from the 80s. They all had their different personas, right? The cool guy, the jock, the princess. And that's how we are in life. We start very early on, first kindergarten, we have these little personas that we create, and we have personas when we're dating and in relationships. We have our persona, the type of friends we hang out with, and then our career and our degrees and what we do. If we're a TEDx speaker, that's part of our persona. Like we go up there, and so this persona is kind of like he says a social mask.
Mm.
And it's not really who we are, but it's how we interact with the world. Just like we wouldn't go out in the world naked. He says it's our psychological clothing. So
Mm.
we want to always put on our best face. And then internally, we know we're kind of lying,
Mm.
but that's not the shadow. Like, oh, I know I'm shy, but I'm going to pretend that I'm outgoing. That's not the shadow. The shadow is actually all the things that doesn't fit that persona, that doesn't even fit your conscious identity, where you would say, I would never be like that person.
Mm.
So, like, if you, a very simple example, all of us women want to be nice and pleasing and agreeable, right? We want to get along. We would never want to be that person that's causing conflict or irritating or troublemaker or mean or hurtful, right? So those things go in our shadow. Now you may think, why would that be a bad thing? Like, I don't want to be that way.
Yeah.
But what happens is we compromise ourselves to keep that shadow away from us, like to be hurtful. We don't really tell the truth, or we don't express ourselves, or we don't take risks because we're afraid we're going to be that. And so we have a lot of things in our shadow that we're not conscious of that are actually driving our life.
Mm.
And about midlife, we end up going, I'm not happy. There's people, I'm sure you've been, uh, speak to so many clients that have had a career and decided, what the heck am I doing? Like, I'm a medical doctor because my family's a medical doctor, and I can't stand it. Like, I want to do something, I want to paint, or do something else. So we end up at that midlife between 30 and 40, start questioning, like, who am I? And that's really the process. You have to face your shadow, and then that's where it's leading to find your true self. So instead of being the person that you were shaped by other people, you really discover who you really are for yourself.
Mm.
And that's really the power. And I think that totally fits in with the theme of your podcast. It's like who is the real you? And we don't even know until we examine the shadow. And
Mm.
many people are shocked when they find out. I was shocked when I found out what was in my shadow. It's really, really powerful because it takes a lot of energy to push it down. It's like when you put a ball under water, like a beach ball under the water, it takes a lot of energy to hold it down. And so imagine all that energy just protecting the persona that you could be using to create from, but you're so exhausted trying to be something that you don't even feel as you to be in the world, and you feel exhausted and drained, and it's because of the shadow energy that's really a lot of vitality in life that you're just not letting in as being a part of your life. And so the shadow really wants to live through you. It's a part of your psyche that it wants to be expressed, and if we don't acknowledge it, it shows up in other people. And
Mm.
that's how we start to acknowledge it. So that would be the first step. And I have some ways for people to access it. But uh, I know I said a lot there. Any
Yeah.
questions about that?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, I love what you said about the shadow really being when you look at somebody and say like, oh, I would never be that. I would never do that. So it's like the opening portal into it looks like it's some sort of judgment, some sort of disgust, some sort of lack of approval.
It's a judgment. Yeah. Like it's
Yeah.
like, and it could be a pleasant judgment too. Like think about someone you really admire
Mm,
and you don't identify as that. That's your shadow as well. So a
mm,
lot of people think shadow is all the negative stuff about yourself, but mostly it's the things that are too light or too dark for our conscious self that we're our persona that we are trying to keep up.
mm. That's funny. I'm gonna have to tell my boyfriend. He always says, "Oh, you're the funny one. I'm not." And maybe that's
Hmm.
his shadow. Maybe he is
Yeah,
funny.
that's his shadow.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so why does it like if somebody looks at these judgments they're having on other people and they're kind of like passing these judgments without kind of looking back at themselves and saying, "Oh, this means something about me." Would Jung say that every single judgment we have is through our lens? And do you agree with that? Like, where's
Mhm,
the
I
line?
do.
Because I'm okay, so tell me a
I
little bit
know.
more.
Yeah, I know. And the thing is, it's not a one-to-one, like, oh, I judge that person, that must be my shadow. But if we're judging and it's happening inside our mind, it has to do with us.
Mm,
It's like something. And there's also like these big moral questions, about like political views, religious views, all these things that are happening. People have intense views on and right and wrong and all that. But it's more than that. It's like examining, like, why does that trigger me so much? And why personally does that trigger me so much? Like we get caught up in world events and then we get like real triggered about it. And it's like, it's not to say it's wrong, but to say, this is an opportunity here. I'm triggered here. And we tell a lot of our students because a lot of times they have a hard time, and I'm sure you see this with people that are really having a tough time with the world and the way things are, and they don't know where to put it, and how to handle it. And it's like use it for your own growth. Like what is showing up for you, and how can you make yourself more conscious by examining these things, and what is it triggering in you? What is the fear in you
mm,
around that?
mm. Okay,
But
so
yeah, it shows up. I mean, again, like I always tell someone, if you were thin and someone called you a fatty, you
mhm,
wouldn't, and you didn't believe you were overweight or anything, you were
it wouldn't
perfect, it
stick.
wouldn't even bother you, right? But if
Yeah.
they said fatty and you were worried about it, it's like it's because you have that in your mind. So it's like everything, it's in your mind. So it's a part of you.
It kind of reminds me of like some friendships I have. Like, I was in a group of women in Colorado maybe like 5 years ago, and it just stuck out to me. We all sat in a circle and they said, "What traumatizing experience have you had from other women?" And it was interesting because I was like, not really like, and everybody always says, "Oh, Ashley, you're good at being a friend. Like that's something you're good at." And I always responded like, "Oh, I don't really think I've had an experience with a friend that like has shaken me up to the point where it influences me in the present to the extent that I'm
Mm-hmm.
aware of."
Mm-hmm.
But everybody else around the circle had experiences with women that create sensitivities. One
Mm-hmm.
friend she was bullied and people threw bowling balls or not bowling balls, golf balls at her when she
Bowling balls, that would be really
that I don't know if she'd
hard.
be here for that, survive that. But
Yeah.
she told me that in middle school they put golf balls in a sock and hit her with it.
Oh
Like kids
man,
are
yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
Um and then another one she said that she always felt left out, and it's interesting because kind of going back to this shadow work, they'll call me when they have something come up, and I've kind of earned their secure attachment because I know what their wounds are. So I know that so and so has a thing about being unincluded, so I'll text them when something's happening with a lot of people and say, "Hey, this is happening, you're not included. I just don't think you know the person's running it." So I hold
Hmm.
I hold their insecurities in my awareness. But I always notice that when they're triggered for them, they don't exist for me. And so I
Yeah.
love that this is kind of just proof of these shadows. Like this
Yeah.
person.
Everyone has, even in the family, like I don't know if you have siblings, but all of my siblings, we're so different with the way we see our childhood, the way we see our parents, like everything is so unique. And no two people see the world alike. And that's the thing. What we do is we assume that everyone should know how to act and know how to be. and be according to our rules, and they have their own rules, and then if you fall, trip over someone else's rules, and then they're like, what, why did that trigger them? And you just didn't know that that was part of their, judgment. And so I think it makes us more compassionate when we do shadow work, because we see that, we can really identify, and like, it's a deep process. It's not more than just like one coaching session. It's a process, and there's different layers. But when you really get there, it's like, you just really feel this incredible compassion for people in the world, and that everyone's just acting out of their ego, and they don't mean to hurt you. Like, most people are not conscious. And
Mm-hmm.
to even just know that, if you take anything from this interview, that just don't take it personally. They're just projecting on their stuff onto you. And not to say you don't keep your boundaries, but it's not personal. It's like, if the Rob always says, my husband, he's always saying, if you grew up in that same situation that had their same life, you would have acted the same way. Like, if you had that package of conditioning, you may have acted that same way. And we have to have compassion for people. And then that's the only way they can change, is if we just open up and have compassion for people. But most of all, ourselves. For me, shadow work has given me such a level of self-compassion, because when I first started doing personal growth, it was all about building up my confidence and, doing the right thing, and like kind of going for this perfection, or this perfect human being who's always positive and always knows the right thing and wise and can't make a mistake, and can't be insecure at all, and it's like loving that part of yourself and being like, yeah, that's the ego. It's not who I really am. It's just, my conditioning, and it's a part of me, and I don't have to hate it. I just have to understand and have more compassion for myself, so I can move beyond it.
I love this so much. And I know you have some questions that are kind of
Yeah.
about core questions about like how to kind of get into your shadow, how to kind of break
Mhm.
past it, how to see it. So it's funny, by the way, because everybody, I know Deborah just for context. And so there was one time I had a client that was, we've had such wonderful clients, but there was one that just didn't want to pay their payment plan, but they were really happy with our work. And Deborah was helping me see my shadow with that. And yeah, I feel like it's like little everyday triggers and experiences that are the best opener and starter into your shadow. But what would be a starting question for everybody listening right now to start to get some leverage on what is their shadow?
So I have 4 questions, and anyone who says any of my courses, they have them on their phone and they're written out. And anytime they're triggered, they just read the questions. And it's like a self-coaching, beautiful way to just start opening up. Now, this isn't complete shadow work. This is just, there's insight and then there's transformation. So insight is not enough, but at least it gets you started. And insight is actually a great first step.
Mm,
So the first question is, name a person who triggers you, or a type of person who triggers you. So bullies, or aggressive people, or, what, my boss triggers me, or someone on my team triggers me, or someone in the public eye triggers you.
mm-hmm,
And then like, describe them in like 3 words. Like, what would their persona be like, or their personality? So are they in the way that you judge them with? So maybe they're mean, or selfish, or ignorant, or whatever. Like, you come up with those names and you write them down.
mm-hmm,
And the second question is, how do you avoid being like them? So you look at those labels and you're like, how do I avoid being mean, selfish, and blank? And then you start thinking about, what do I create in my life, my persona, my identity, that I would never be like that person. So shadow, remember, is things that you do not identify as you.
mm,
Like, you would never be that, right? Oh, that would be terrible if I was selfish.
mm,
And then, how has avoid being like them and being this persona limited your life?
mm,
And then the last question is, what would open up for you if you're able to be like them without any consequences? That's the key.
ooh,
If it was no consequences and you could be selfish and get away with it, what would open up for you? Because this is why we create these personas, because we think something terrible is going to happen if I step into any of these things.
mm,
People are going to leave me. People are going to judge me. I'm going to feel less than. I'm going to be dispelled from the group. There's a very powerful instinct in us to be accepted in a group because that's where survival comes from. The hierarchy of needs, love and belonging is one of our core human needs. So, it's like all that stuff, but it's the ego.
Mm,
It's this ego that thinks it's separate from everything and it needs to kind of fit in and it doesn't have any power. And so
mm,
we're starting to see, hmm, this is interesting. And so when you're doing that last question, imagine you are like watching yourself think of these questions, like being the witness and not in your thinking and feeling mind, which is the ego. And you're just kind of like sitting in that witness. And that pure awareness is really who you are. It's just this absence of thought and emotion. It's just this energy, your beingness. And you start to see the ego as just a function and it's just this little thing that's happening in your life, but it's not who you are. And as you keep doing shadow work, it becomes less and less a driver in your life and more like a passenger. Like you don't want to get rid of it because it's good. Like if you need to survive and, put on a show for people and, it's very functional, but you can't let it drive anymore. And
mm,
then you let it loses its power. And then this other part of you that has that pure potential starts to open up.
mm,
But and that's why these questions are very specific to ask that, well, what would be possible if
mm,
I could just get away with it? Like what would happen? And then you start to realize that no one is watching, no one is judging, no one cares as much as you do. And the things that bother you or the things you worry about will show up out there.
mhm.
Not those things showing up out there aren't things you should worry about. They are the things you worry about. So if you stop worrying about them, they stop showing up.
Okay, so there's a couple thoughts here. Like,
Mhm.
I love the way you broke it into those four questions. Like, what is the judgment? What is the belief that you have that you would say is not you? Like, this person's mean,
Mhm.
this person's this. Um, and how do you operate to avoid being that person, right? So I'm actually thinking, like I worked with a woman once that she came into my business and I remember thinking, man, she's so mean. She's so mean. Like, um, and I just thought, how does she do it? Right. And so I guess if I was going through this exercise for everybody listening, she's mean. Okay, well, how do I behave to not be mean? How do I operate in the world? Well, I try to give a little extra. I try to not be as direct. Like, for example, I just hired a new project manager and she was asking me about payment plans. She was like, hey, do we send reminders or do they do it themselves and just pay you? And I thought, well, it'd be so nice if they just marked their calendar and it happened. So maybe we can just suggest in the opening email for them to mark their calendar. And so the email she sent me, the draft was like, please mark your calendar. We don't send notifications and whatever. And I just remember thinking, oh, we got to make that sugarier. Like, I don't
That's
want to
mean
be
because
mean.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna like that, like a mean person takes money from people, right?
Yeah. Like, even if I'm doing work, it's like, oh, it's mean that I'm not reminding them and I don't want that burden on me. And it's mean that
Mm.
whatever. So I was like, oh,
Okay.
we need sugarier text.
Yeah.
And so there was that. And then I thought, okay, how's it limiting me? Well, things would just be a lot easier if I didn't have to micromanage exact words in an email out of fear of being mean. Like I'd probably get
Yeah.
free time back. And then I
All
think,
that emotional energy tied up in that, right? Like
oh,
reading that
yeah.
email over, is it mean enough? How many times have we done that?
Oh
Oh,
my gosh, yes. And then if I go through your process, the fourth question, what would open up if I were like them? I never thought about that question, but I think I would probably, I don't know, like one part of me thinks if I was mean like my perception of this woman, my team would probably be more dialed in. Maybe they'd be so afraid of me, they'd like get things done. I'm so um good energy with everybody that
mhm.
sometimes I think it's like, hey, they weren't listening to me on that meeting and I have to repeat myself a lot. And I bet you if I was mean and I was like, this is my story right now, I'm making it
Yeah,
up
yeah.
live on the YouTube podcast. Sometimes I think, wow, if I was a total asshole and they were scared of me a little more, they would listen when I delegated and then they wouldn't be like causing another hour of the day for me to like re-say what I already said, right?
Yeah,
Would
and
that
the
be an
key
example?
is with the shadow, it doesn't mean you have to be mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
because I call it persona swapping in my book, like a spark. Like some people think, oh, okay, I'm just going to be mean now.
Yeah.
Uh, it's about not acting out of fear of being perceived as mean.
Mm,
So it's not that you have to be mean, but it's the fear of
mm,
being that way or being perceived that way that stops you.
that's so useful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And let me ask you this question because
yeah,
a
please.
follow up. So what if you were mean? What if one of your team members is like, Ashley is so mean?
Oh, that makes
What
me
would you
so
be?
scared.
What would be the worst thing that could happen?
Ashley's a
Like, what's your worst fear?
God. I mean, Ashley is so mean, and I'm gonna tell the whole world, and she's gonna have no success and no partner and no friends because everybody's gonna find out how mean she is.
I think it might be well, I'm going to propose something.
Propose. I always accept Deborah's proposals in all ways.
Okay. Oh, that's nice. What if you were afraid of their meanness
Mm,
and them being mean back?
mm,
Because a lot of times people pleasing and being agreeable and, the nice, we're really afraid of people's anger
mm.
and that explosion of emotion. And it's like, because there's mean like on that, think about it emotionally. And so with this work, we want to go deeper than just these questions, but just to kind of give you a teaser, those who want to go deeper, but it really is the emotion that we're afraid of pissing people off because
Yeah.
it's like scary, right? If
Yeah.
someone's angry at you and it's like, because it's, yeah, of course you don't want to be not nice and people
Yeah.
it's like shame, all those emotions, like you're going to be shamed or you're going to feel guilty or you're going to be attacked
Right.
basically. And
Right.
so the core conditioning that we have from 2 million year minds is it's being attacked, is like that's in all of us. It's in our genetics.
Yeah. Like I,
And especially women, because we are really raised to not do the battle, where boys are raised to fight a little bit and be like bolsterous. And I don't know, maybe the modern children are raised differently, but in my generation, women were raised to be, and I think socially we're all raised to be more agreeable and
Mhm.
kind and be nice and, don't make a mess and smile and don't be too
Yeah.
loud and all
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah, it's like yeah, you point out a funny point. Like I remember, was it you that I was telling Deborah, like when I was in preschool, the kids, I grew up in LA, so maybe this says something, but I remember being in the valley. I went to preschool in Tarzana. And I remember little kids saying, I'm gonna sue you, like little 5-year-old,
Oh my God.
so LA. And
Oh,
I
that is so LA.
Right. And so I feel like as a business owner, like I have so many friends that like, they have horror stories. Like we hired an employee for 12 days and she wasn't a fit. And now she's suing us for $200,000 because of our cell phone policy that doesn't even make
Yeah.
sense in the employee handbook or um, things like that. I even had one friend who told a guy that was working for her, "Hey, don't lift that. It's too heavy." And then he lifted it and he hurt his back and he sued them. So it's like I feel like we live in a world where there's a lot of possibility for people to lose everything.
Hmm.
Um, I had a lawsuit come to me, and this is like a deep fear, so maybe there's something Jungian in here. It's such
Well,
a
it's definitely a shadow because if it shows up, it's
yeah,
reflecting. Like if you don't make your shadow conscious,
yeah,
like Jung says, an inner situation is not made conscious, it shows up as fate.
yeah,
And so you have to see it connected to something in you, that fear of being, someone getting in trouble, right?
yeah,
Like it's getting in trouble or um, you know, displeasing someone, but then it shows up as that. But
right.
also it gives you an opportunity to be mean because you
Ah!
have to fight, right? It's like sometimes if you don't fight the battle comes to you. Like if you refuse to fight the battle will come to you.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of this guy, but I mean I can't even say it on this if I wanted to, but one of the lawsuits I got was a sound bite. I used a YouTube clip in one of my courses and it was hiding in the bowels of my course library. Like 2014. It was like a new entrepreneur, Ashley, that didn't really know anything about copyright, had like
And
a
everyone's done that, you know?
exactly. So I loved this music. It was like a 4 minute song. It was my favorite song. And I put it in my portal for members of my courses. And I said, use this song, or I put it in some of the MP4 videos to do exercises. If it was like a 2 minute career exercise, I'd put this
Mm.
sound bite on. I guess that artist is like a small, indie artist. He has a lawyer that just goes around and finds people using his song and they scare the shit out of you and say, you owe us $10,000. So I got the scariest email in the middle of COVID. It was like, you owe us $150,000 plus damages. The email went to spam. I ended up Googling the lawyer who represents this guy, and his Twitter said something like, I am the fury of God, or like something literally crazy. And I Googled and it said he'd been disadmitted from the bar, like kicked out of the New York bar, readmitted to
Oh,
the bar due to a cocaine issue. Like he just seemed like somebody that like all my little
scammer.
shadows are going to come dance around, like,
Yeah, and if you think about it, like you're an honest person, you want to do the right thing,
right.
you always are up and up with your contracts, like and it's like your shadow would be someone who what they're really doing is attacking your character.
Yeah. Well,
That
so
you're
exactly.
you're stealing from them, right? You're right. So
Yeah.
that's,
Well,
you
so get
know,
this, like I actually responded to his first very scary email, and then I had a bunch of attorneys say, Ashley, stop responding. But I
oh yeah, you don't
responded
want to do
and
that.
said, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I was using this soundbite. How did you find it? What do you guys have an annual licensing fee I can make good on? What can I do to make good with this? Like, I remember just being like, holy shit, I'm so scared. And I did do it. And I didn't know I did it. And the thing ended up costing me like maybe $15,000. And then, which was really hard at the time. And then 3 years later, I guess I told somebody on my team, can you sweep through everything? And we have like probably 50 hours worth of content on our website.
Hmm.
I said, can you sweep through everything we have and make sure this soundbite has officially died in this business and it has no signs of you know, haunting us? And sure enough, she missed like maybe, 10 seconds of it somewhere. The lawyer must have some people that weave through your materials and look to find it again. Came back, cost me $50,000 that time. And the reason I had to do it is because he filed the lawsuit, repeat infringement, like all that. My lawyer said, Ashley, you're going to win. He's wrong, but it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to prove it.
Hmm.
And that's the world that I think is very real. Like a lot of people have a lot of fear and they make
Hmm.
these judgments on situations, and the fear is founded on something that is a real situation. So I don't know how this plays into shadow work, but I guess I'm wondering how do we just have a belief about something that actually motivates us to handle the thing properly? Like sometimes
Well,
these
it doesn't mean that you don't deal with the situation, but it's like if this pattern keeps showing up, like why am I, why is this showing up for me, and examining it, because
Mm,
it is something for you. Like it's like so imagine you had I always say this is a great way to look at it. Imagine you had a dream, a dream about someone suing you and having this whole thing. And then if you can interpret that dream metaphorically, what would you say your psyche's trying to tell you? And that's what we do in our life. Everything is symbolic.
yeah,
And if we could start looking at that, then it's because if we look at the world as it's a scary place and that there's bad people out there and I have no power and I don't know when the next person's going to come in and swoop in. But if we have that sense of, okay, there's something in my psyche that's resonating with this that keeps bringing this up. I
yeah.
need to examine what it is, and then it doesn't show up anymore. It's really, really
A
interesting.
magic trick. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I guess the question I was thinking more is like the belief that he was mean is what got me safety. It's what got me to stop responding to the email. It was what got me to
Mhm.
get protection. So it's like
Yeah.
sometimes we have these beliefs. Is there any line between a belief and a judgment, or would you say they're the same thing?
Well, I don't think it's a belief. It's like, I mean, I wouldn't use the word belief because it's kind of like a thought. I mean, I guess it's
Yeah.
kind of like a judgment, but it's really I always say it's a trigger. Like if something triggers you, like you can look at it and say, this person is mean and I need to deal with them, like that's fine. But if it's like has a charge to it, it's really something that your mind you're being activated in
Hmm.
some way. And we know there's scammers out there. We know people online are always like trying to invite my mother to their Facebook friends so they could, hack her stuff. But my mother's so worried about getting ripped off that she keeps having these things created, sometimes. So it's always like we what we fear ends up being what we create more
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. It's funny because I don't think people fully catch that soundbite and really grasp how real it is. Like, I think about when I lost all my money. My biggest fear, I grew up with a dad who lost all his money. And in my first business, I had an online platform with all these courses. I made a lot of money. I lost all my money. Why did I lose all my money? Well, my dad made all his money and he lost all his money. And I remember thinking, I never want that to happen to me. That's a huge
That's
fear. So
yeah.
when I made a bunch of money, I got a bunch of lawyers to tell me it was okay that I was making that much money. They came in, they looked at all my materials. I had a webinar selling an e-course, and they were like, well, there's these gray zones in case law. You might want to change this on your thing, change that on thing. I literally self-sabotaged my whole thing. Like by the end of changing it to make sure I didn't lose all my money, to make sure that I wouldn't get in trouble and I was allowed to be that successful, um, I'd sabotaged the whole thing. Like my whole
Mhm.
business stopped working
Yeah.
and I lost all my money. So it's like the fear of losing all my money and the action I took out of losing all my money translated to me losing all my money. And so people, it's like sometimes they don't see that cycle or even dating,
Because you're
right?
not conscious, you don't even aren't even aware. Like at the time, like
Yeah.
you have like something about your father, but you're unaware of like what the drive. And so it's all these micro decisions we make every day that are unconscious that we do to sabotage that we're not aware of. And if we're not conscious of it, we can't change it. And it's not like a limiting belief, like I have to believe in myself. It's more like what is drive? What am I pushing away? What am I grasping for? What am I fearing? And those are the things that are driving us. We're either driven by our ego's attachment to like being someone else and this idealized self, or we're pushing away the unidealized self, and we're
Mm,
never really being who we are. We're just trying to like create another facade out there and avoid something else. And so in that process, it's we it's been going on since we were little, the same patterns emotionally, and we just play it out with different characters all the time. So
yeah.
this character, I always say, even if it's a sucky experience, which that was,
Yeah.
is what if you can look at it as an opportunity to break free for yourself, and even like the Buddhists say, take it on, like kind of like this idea that I want to be free of it so everyone can be free of it in the world. Like you're
Yeah.
just like, okay, let me embrace this. What is this teaching me?
Mm,
Because if we just avoid it or fear it and like just want to get rid of it, you're losing all that like kind of juice that's in there that could actually break you free and take you to another level.
I love that so much. It's like, why do these things keep showing up in my world? Like, what is this telling?
Yeah, what is this? What is this? What is this? What is my deeper self trying to teach me? Like, what is it? What is it trying to communicate to me?
I would
And
say,
we often like talk, do in Jungian coaching, we do dream interpretation and active imagination, and symbols will show up, and we do a lot of different ways to kind of get at it because it's not conscious and it's very irrational. the
mm,
uh, the ego is very irrational, and the logical mind is like trying to put logic to something that's very irrational, of a bright 9-year-old that created these programs to begin with.
mm,
And yeah, so it really is a beautiful thing. And I've had experiences as an entrepreneur, but entrepreneur for 20 years, ups and downs, loss and gain,
right.
people coming in that caused problem. Yeah, I mean, everything, but I used it. And every time it's
Mm.
actually made me more money.
That's amazing. And I think
Yeah. So every time, if you know how to work with it, it actually takes you to the next level.
that's
If you
wonderful.
don't work with it, guess what? It keeps coming back at you. It keeps coming back at you.
Mm,
And then it's like failure prevention. A
yeah.
shadow is failure prevention, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that so much. And it's funny you talk about dream interpretation. I woke up this morning, I was telling my partner, I had this dream like earlier this week. I was randomly on Oprah and I was in the bathroom and I ran into her in an elevator with a friend and she's like, you should come on my show today. And we were supposed to be in the audience. And I don't even have an Oprah thing. A lot of my friends are like, I want to be on Oprah. I have none of
Mhm.
it. So it's funny that this dream happened to me. And I heard her name, her call me my name in in the bathroom. I came running out of the bathroom, tossed my purse into like my seat in the audience and ran up onto the stage. And then I left after the thing and was like, oh my gosh, my purse. And the whole dream was, oh my gosh, I lost my belongings. And then
Ooh, do
three
you want to know
nights
what that
later,
means?
well, get this, Deborah, same thing. 3 nights later, I'm in Israel with my, or not Israel, India with my partner. He's North Indian. And
Hmm.
it was like, instead of a cruise ship, it was an airplane. And they're like, okay, we're going to drop you off today here. And then you're going to come back on at 9 p.m. I lost my backpack. I left my backpack in India. The whole dream was, where's my backpack? So how does Jungian psychology
Oh, this is a very common dream. You're gonna love
really?
this. Yes. So anything that has to do with the purse or your wallet, or even clothes is your persona, your identity.
Oh my gosh.
So it's very, very, very easy. So Oprah's like the ideal, right? And she's inviting you to be on the stage, which is your bigger life. Like you're more, she represents, I would think, success,
Yeah.
you taking your business to the next level. And leaving that purse on the chair is that in the audience, is that the Ashley, the persona that you were, you're leaving her behind
Mm,
to step on the stage. And then but the fear that you have about finding that purse is the ego being afraid of letting go of that identity.
mm, mm.
And so the dream is again, like you're in that evolution. Anytime people are around me, they're going to evolve. Sorry, Ashley.
I love
uh,
that.
you get like you start the process just activates when they're around me and Rob. Like people are like, like all this stuff is happening. I'm having these dreams. Yeah. So it's really that question of like, what are you hanging on to? Like the
Mm,
being so kind and like that you're on the journey of individuation. And then the same thing with the trip, a friend, one of our clients had one where she was getting on a plane and the stewardess or the flight attendant, that's the proper term, said to her, you can go on the trip, but you can't bring your baggage. I was like, oh my God, that is a pun. And so sometimes dreams speak in puns.
wow.
But yeah, so it's about like stepping up and then you have these like other characters sometimes that show up in your dream and they're really parts of your shadow that you're seeing. Like people that irritate you in your dreams are also parts of your shadow that are trying to be integrated and
Mm.
yeah. So that was a cool dream.
I mean, the fact that it was like new situations, same problem in the next dream.
Yeah.
Like I woke up and he's
And
like,
India is also spiritual and enlightened and
yeah,
higher consciousness. Yeah.
yeah.
You got to let go of that persona.
He
You got
told
to
me,
let
he's
go of the
like,
ego. Let
I
go of the
know.
ego.
He's like, well, when you say let go of the ego, people hear that all the time. I have two final questions for you because I could literally
Okay.
talk to you forever. You're such a joy. Like,
Oh,
one question is like, what does it really mean when people say let go of the ego? So that's like one question, like for as it relates to my dream. I'm sure anybody listening has had the dream of I can't find
well,
something.
you never can let go of it completely. Like you can't get rid of your ego. It's a function. It's not an object. It's actually like digestion. You being in a body, it creates this sense of I. So it's not really a thing, but we get attached and identified with it. That's like when I say let go, you're letting go of the attachment to this limited I and being willing to step into something beyond that conditioning. So
Mm,
that's what I
mm,
mean by that.
mm. And then the other question
So
I,
the things like you letting go of your attachment to being nice,
right.
your attachment to people thinking that you're not mean, that it's an attachment that keeps you very in a limited, it's almost like you have a very limited, narrow way to be, where if you drop if you didn't worry about that, imagine like the choices you would have.
And I guess the other thing I'm just writing so many notes with you is like, let's say somebody went through your 4 questions, like what is the judgment?
Mhm.
How do you operate to not be that thing? How is that limiting you? What would open up for you if you were like that person that you're judging or that thing? The next question I have that is nothing to do with these four really is like, what do you do with it once kind of do these 4 questions? Like, yeah, I think this woman that I've met is really mean. I'm kind of scared of her. Now what? How do I interact with her differently? How do I use shadow work to move it along and be better in my day to
That's
day?
a great
Yeah,
question.
I would
Yeah.
love to not
So
feel how mean she feels to me. I would love to feel like I'm on some sort of drug that makes me feel like she's great and fun and have a better time.
Well, there's a whole process, that this is like insight, but and I work with people for years, not that they get through shadow work, usually about 3 months gets people like a major shift in their shadow work. But so the first thing you would do is work with the feeling that you have with this mean person and what she pulls up in you.
Mm,
And so you're kind of sitting with the feeling and you're just like noticing how your ego or the sense of I is repulsed by it. And what you're doing is you're watching, you're not in it, you're watching it and you're just being like seeing both sides. And as you see both sides, you're starting to see, wow, how much of my life have I been driven by this fear? And you're just looking at it from a higher perspective.
mm,
One of my clients this week, I said, imagine that like you're looking at it from your ego, and then imagine looking at it from a higher perspective, like a light on top of your head. And if
mm,
you had like this higher wisdom to look at it, it would be different. And so it's about it like sitting with the feeling, we call it. It's an emotional power integration as our technique. And we have questions that you ask yourself while you're in that emotion, obviously not in the midst of being with that person, but when you're alone. And when someone really triggers us, it kind of sticks with us. Ever
yeah.
had people that you just like you're there for days, you're just like, oh,
Ugh,
irritated. So it's
yes.
like this is a perfect opportunity to like, what am I pushing away? And do I have time to tell you a quick story about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Okay. I had when I first started as a hypnotherapist, I had a client that sent me, would love me, love me, love me, sent me referrals all the time. She was like my favorite and she was so nice and we got along. And then all of a sudden she got sent me this really nasty email of how I stole an idea from her or something. And I was just like, okay,
What?
very, very hurt and very like I cried when I got it. I'm like, oh no, like what
Yeah.
did I do? Like, and I called her up right away and I was like, let me, explain. And her son was like, nope, I don't want to talk to you. She doesn't want to talk to you. And I'm like, feeling so trapped. And so I went home to Rob and Rob said, have you ever heard, the story of Medusa?
Mm,
And he said, yeah. I said, yeah. And he said, remember that Perseus couldn't get her directly. He had to look in a reflection to see, just to slay the monster. And he said, that anger is your anger. And I said, I don't have any anger. I'm so positive, like I'm so giving. And it turned out that if I sat with that feeling of feeling sad that she was mad at me, to all of a sudden getting pissed off about it. And then I like had all these emotions come up and I was just watching myself for like 2 days. And then finally I realized that I was so used to being the pleaser that I couldn't let anyone be mad at me. So I think this relates. And I realized, wow, what a beautiful opportunity that I would have never had. And so I sent her so much love. And I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you for giving me this gift. I didn't even care anymore whether she was hated me forever. I was just like, I got so much out of it. And when, that Monday she emailed me and said, I am so sorry. I didn't even have to talk to her. Like the situation shifted like magic. And
mm,
so it's like this stuff is like magic because we're all connected anyway. And if there's a dynamic with people, we fit together like puzzle pieces, it'll show up. You just have to worry about your piece and the other piece will fall away and
mm,
you'll have a different experience. And so that's the beauty of shadow work. And it's the most beautiful experience because there's no way I could have seen my anger because it was so unconscious, but
mm,
she brought it out and it wasn't originally anger, it was sadness. And then I had to really go and unpack it and unpack it. And then it was like, wow,
mm,
I am really frustrated and angry at all the pleasing I've been doing all these years. And it was just there it is. And
mm,
it's like giving life to a part of you that you were never allowed to be expressed. And
mm.
it's a beautiful part because there's so many parts of us that are like waiting to like come out in us. But the ego's like, no, you're not allowed to come out and play. And it's all the power and that we are.
Yeah, I
And
love it.
that's really,
That was
it's not me being angry. It's like passion and expression and be not being so pleasing all the time and compromising all the time.
so then I guess final question. And I feel like, oh my gosh, if I didn't have any more meetings today, I'd just sit here with you for the whole afternoon. You're just such a joy. Like, um, final question is like, this takes work. It's a process, right? So we see its shadow and we navigate people all
Mhm.
day long that trigger our shadow. What
Mhm.
advice do you have as we keep navigating people that are triggering our shadow when we haven't sorted our shadow yet? Like we know they're triggering our shadow and we're not on the other side of it. We haven't worked with it yet. We haven't found the gift in it yet. What would be your one statement for somebody that's like, oh, my dad is one big shadow for me, and I got a lot of deep diving to do in Jungian psychology with this, but how do I deal with him tonight at dinner?
I would say that just look at it as an opportunity and just be like, there's something here for me to learn.
Mm,
And I might not know what it is right now. Instead of trying to have your ego figure it out, just kind of, and I like this idea of like surrendering it to my higher self or to God or to the divine or whatever people call their, other than the ego I part of themselves. And you just hand it over.
yeah.
And you just don't have to try so hard. And I do recommend getting coaching, like
Yeah.
not necessarily with me because I don't really take private clients that much anymore. But yeah, get coaching because that's the only way you could really get at it because your ego tries to hide it all the time.
Mm, thank you.
But yeah, there's ways you could start exploring it. Those four questions, if you even just do that, it could change your life. And
Mm,
then sitting with the feeling and just getting curious about it instead of thinking this emotion is bad.
mhm,
Like there's something here that wants to be expressed. Jung says, something has come alive in me that needs my attention. And it's like, oh, like there's like, it's like, instead of thinking of our unconscious as this like repository of like patterns, think of it as a wisdom, a wise, intelligent, creative force that's
mm,
trying to reach us. And it wants us to have all the amazing things we want in life. And the ego's just kind of like the stopgap and saying, no, it's too scary. Don't do it. And you just have to trust in that other
mm.
place that there's more to you to be expressed. And
Oh,
that's really the beauty of the work. It's like that entry point into your real self.
thank you so much for being here, Deborah. I appreciate you so much. And where can everybody find you?
They can go to creativemindlife.com. And then also, you're going to put in the show notes a copy of my free ebook called The Success Trap, which
Yes.
has tons of shadow work questions in it that you're going to love. It's going to be it's a great book. It's really for people that are, they're at a level of success, but they feel like they're overwhelmed or they're having issues like I'm getting sued or my team is being crazy. And it really just asks you these deeper questions of like, how did that, why are you thinking this way? Some great coaching questions. It's like 40 pages. It's not a light but read, but it's chock full of exercises for people to get started.
Thank you so much again for coming on. And everybody, check out the show notes.
And thank you so much, Ashley. It's been so much fun. And thank you for having me.